Inaccurate, misinformation, wrong, flat out wrong guidance.
I am the biggest expert there is on my children.
I knew what my rights were, and I knew that they were violating the law, and they didn't care because there was no accountability.
You have to speak up. You'll never know the difference if you don't speak up.
If you still are not getting what you need and they continue to violate the law because they can, because they know you're not going to do anything about it, I can't help you anymore.
Don't expect somebody to do it for you.
The way the systems are designed, they are designed for denials, and our school systems are failing our kids with disabilities at an exponential rate. But if there is one thing I could stress right now to every parent of a youngster,
welcome back to another episode of Get UnPuzzled, the podcast where we break down barriers, connect families, and bring real conversations to the autism and disability community. I'm your host, Whitney Price, and today we have an incredibly important discussion with two of West Virginia's top advocates. Our guests, Christina Smith of Astrive Advocacy and Christy Black of the Disability Rights of West Virginia, have dedicated their lives to fighting for their children and the disability community. Their advocacy has been instrumental in leading 4 West Virginia IDD Waiver rallies, pushing for meaningful change and better support for families across the state. You will not want to miss this conversation, so let's dive in. Thank you guys so much for the work that you're doing and for dedicating so much of your time and your life to advocacy, helping families like mine and other families who have children in the special needs community. Christina, I'm going to go ahead and start with you. In your opinion, what exactly is advocacy?
so there's personal advocacy, there's legislative, there's educational, there's group advocacy.
Policy.
There are so many types.
Right.
A lot of people, a lot of parents, a lot of individuals with disabilities, when they hear advocacy, their mind goes immediately to the Capitol. It goes immediately to having to go meet with a legislator. And that is, if that's what you feel that you can do, that's fantastic. But there are other categories of advocacy that, depending on the season of life of the individual, are just as important. It may mean, somebody has to advocate for what they want to eat for breakfast. It may mean, wanting a certain roommate. When you're talking about the advocacy journey and a significant impact, I think that throughout the seasons of life, from birth through the end of life for a person with a disability and those providing care and supporting them, advocacy can look a little different. I believe that individuals with intellectual and developmental disabilities and people just with cognitive disabilities should be valued. They have inherent value. They should be treated as equal. They may need accommodations and modifications possibly to live independently and to be educated. But by golly, my Anna was not going to be treated any differently from a inclusion in the community than other people.
You guys are at the top of the food chain when it comes to advocacy. You guys are the end all, the ones that the rest of us are going, see if you can get a hold of them and
But you know
try
what?
to get.
We used to not be. We started just where you are, and it is only with the number of years that we've been doing it and the people that we have surrounded ourselves with that we have been able to rise to this level. And we want nothing more than to have tons of people in that same category because it's desperately needed.
It is, it's about paying it forward. We learned from someone else. Our journey started just a lot like a lot of other parents, but having our child, having that diagnosis, and then trying to navigate the system and find those resources. It's time for other people, to step up to the plate as well and to learn just like we learned. And I think that I think anyone can be as successful at it, I guess, as we've been. Not that we win every battle because
Not at all.
we most certainly don't.
We don't take no for an answer
That's
at the
exactly
beginning.
right.
And that's the point of
Yeah,
advocacy.
but I think that's it, though. It's still, there were parents that were before us. There's going to be parents after us. But the importance is to come together, to stand together, to learn from each other. My goal has always been to teach everybody else the mistakes that I made.
Actually, one of the first experiences that I had with advocacy was when I was fighting for our insurance to cover our son's therapies. That was something that I would have never imagined having to fight so hard for and trying to get them to actually pay our claims. And I'm telling you, that almost caused us such a complete financial hardship that's most people don't ever have to understand.
People assume that when you have a child with a disability that,
Yeah.
and you have insurance that, oh, you're great. Let me tell you, what we paid out of pocket for Anna was hospitalized 18 times before her first birthday. And that included open heart surgery. I mean, she was diagnosed. She was diagnosed with Down syndrome 4 months prior to her being born, prenatally. And then they diagnosed her AV canal defect just a couple of weeks later, prenatally. So when she was born, we knew it was going to happen. But she was hospitalized 18 times her first year, not including her open heart surgery. And I worked at a nonprofit and Tim was a mail carrier. And, people just assume because we didn't qualify for any supports and services that, oh, we had to pay 20% of all of that because that's what our insurance had to pay for it. It was terrible. And we got denied CDCSP and never did get it before she got waiver because her expenses were too high.
With waiver too, my daughter was denied the first time. But still, there again, it was that advocacy. It was that advocacy piece that got me there because I wasn't afraid to speak up to them.
But you were both advocates before your children were even born. So you were both learning. That's amazing that you were both in a position to where you had to gain as much knowledge as possible before your child is even here.
Right.
Most of us, at least in my situation, I had these hopes and dreams, and I'm going into this parenting thing as a new parent thinking, okay, check off, one area of the box, and I'm looking for milestones and whatnot. But you guys were given the diagnosis during your pregnancies.
Right.
Is that correct?
Mm-hmm.
So,
Yes.
Christina, what was that like, having that diagnosis, already being pregnant, having these hopes and dreams that we all do as new parents? What was that experience like?
It's funny that from a very young age, I was always that child, that teenager that kind of gravitated toward people with disabilities and was always the first to, sign up to volunteer, working for programs and services, and that was just a natural for me. It was just that that was my personality. I've grown up with individuals in my family who have a disability. So from a very young age, I was exposed to that and lived that as a family member. Not only am I mom to Anna, who has Down syndrome, but my sister actually is a full-time wheelchair user. She's 2 years younger than me. And so from the time she was a teenager, when she was first diagnosed with, she was diagnosed with lupus at 13, that eventually manifested into her being paralyzed, and she's blind in one eye and has limited use of some, some other limitations. So, throughout my life, I have grown up with people with disabilities. So my situation with Anna may not have been the same reaction that other people would have. Was I shocked? 100%. I did have the original blood test, that you really didn't have the option back then, or you may probably had the option, but very few people thought to say no back then. And it was never an issue of me wanting to do anything about the pregnancy if the outcome would have been different, because trust me, after we did have the outcome, they did try to talk me into that. So it was never an issue of whether I was going to move forward with the pregnancy or not. I am the type of person that needs to know. I need information. I need to plan. I need to hit the ground running. And that's exactly what happened. Funny story, my husband was hunting at the time when the doctor called me. I was here in the house with her older sister, Olivia. So Olivia was 2 at the time. And that probably was a good scenario because I was able to have my breakdown. The first thing I did was hit my knees and say, "Dear Lord, help me through this. We have to get through it." And so I had the emotional breakdown. I had the oh my gosh, the shock of what did I just hear? What is this going to look like? Um, but I can say honestly that the fear of the unknown at that time initially hadn't hit me. Um, I am known as the mom who tried to get her child signed up for birth to 3 before she was born. And they kept saying, "Christina, you have to have a birthday. You have to have a birth date and a social security number before you can get signed up for birth to 3. So we have to at least get her out of you before we can sign her up." And that was my plan.
It's funny because my story is almost identical. It is
Yep.
almost identical. I was on my lunch hour. That's how sure I was that this was going to be a negative on that amnio. And they gave me I was by myself. And I remember I kept it together. The doctor later told me he was worried about me because I kept it
Mm-hmm.
so together, because I guess they're not used to that. And so I got to my car just because I knew I had to get it together. And nobody knew that I was having that test at my job except my manager. I worked at a hospital then. And, I called my husband from the car. I remember hearing him gasp, just like, somebody punched him in the stomach. But he was okay. All the way to my friend's house, I had a conversation with God, and I told him that I know that he could take this away. I'm pretty strong in my faith, I think, I feel, I know. So why I thought that I could bargain with God is beyond me. But like God, everything is in is in his control and his power. He proved me wrong. Because that was the thing. I wasn't going to do anything. And my mom brought me this book, Parents' First Guide to Down Syndrome. And I'm like, I'm not reading that. I'm not reading that. And it was probably 2 weeks later, I picked up the book. I read it. By the time my daughter was born, I knew everything about Down syndrome. I ended up being the vice president of the Down Syndrome Network before she was even born. Everything Christina said. It's my experience is very similar, but I think that it is educating yourself. Educating yourself, the more that you educate yourself, the more you feel empowered. And speak up. Is the other thing. Don't be afraid to speak up. Maybe you're wrong, maybe you're right, but you need to speak up. You have to speak up. You'll never know the difference if you don't speak up. And the last thing I would say to new parents is always have high expectations.
Yeah, absolutely. I was getting ready to talk about it. Yeah.
Don't let people tell you no.
Thank you both for sharing those stories because I think it's so important for our listeners to hear that, like you guys said, you didn't start at the top. You
Absolutely.
started as brand new parents in a brand new world that most of us are trying so hard to navigate through. And the years that it took to build up to that, I'm sure were pretty great. Where did you guys go after you had already known and said, okay, we have this diagnosis, we're going into birth to 3? Where did you go from there? When did you start building that education and that knowledge of the laws and the regulations and the IEPs? How did that come about?
Mine came from, like I said, actually my mom, um, she worked for the school system, and she knew a family that had a little girl in kindergarten with Down syndrome. So she had that mom call me, and that mom called me, and she told me about the Down Syndrome Network. So then I went and I saw the other children, and because a lot of all the kids were young, and anyhow, and I heard them talk about this waiver thing and the CDCSP thing and the different things, and it's like, oh, I got to know about that. And so then that's when I began to talk to other parents and kind of find out what the issues were, what there was. And like Christina, I also already knew about birth to three. So I called from my hospital room. I called ahead of time, and they're like the same thing. You can't call until after she's born. And there again, when she was first born, Gracie did not need NICU after she was born. And that's true for a lot of kids with Down syndrome. But she was on the regular mother baby unit. And so, again, I'd read that book. I looked it up, I researched, and not everybody had computers and things then. So it's
Yeah, back then
big old box thing that, I don't think there was a Google,
we
but
had Prodigy.
yeah, so I don't even remember what we had, but I know that it was AOL, I think. Everything
Yeah.
was, your email and all of that. But yeah, so I started researching myself is what I done. But there again, I hit roadblocks before something that my OB told me was, you might want to interview pediatricians. And like Christina, I learned really quick, if you didn't want to be interviewed by me, then I wasn't going to take my kid to you either. I started just reading everything I could get my hands on. I went to national conferences. I was out looking for stipends. A lot of them will have stipends on, for a specific disability on their website. It might not pay for it all, but it will pay for some of it. And then, birth to three, if you're involved in early intervention, a good service coordinator will give you tons of different resources and can connect you to other families oftentimes. So, but that's how I got started, at least with resources, and where I started in building my knowledge base.
Mm-hmm. And to piggyback on some of the things Christy said, absolutely going out, and I mean, I think that we've established that the two of us are ones that will go out and seek information, and I do want to, acknowledge that at the beginning of when someone receives a diagnosis, I mean, they very well may be completely immobilized with just not knowing where to turn and just with the gravity of just the diagnosis, and they still may be in denial. I mean, sometimes it takes parents or family members to be able to process that information and then be able before they can even move forward. And I think that is a frustration because it can be a frustration because there is no timeline on that. There's no timeline on on how you process it. But unfortunately, in our world of the supports and services that are needed, you can't let that not allow you to move forward it personally or with the help of others in seeking out those supports. Does that make sense? It's frustrating when we know parents don't have it within them to move forward because of their state of mind at the moment, but they need to figure out who can help them through that, and surround themselves with other people that can do that for them in the interim until they get to that point.
Disability is not it is a partisan issue. It's not a Democrat, it's not a Republican issue. Disability affects everyone in some way, some manner, whether it is your aging parent, because maybe you don't see them as having a disability. They really do, it affects you. Everyone knows someone that has a disability.
And the one thing I would say to a parent or a family who gets that diagnosis is, I see you. I hear you. My heart breaks for you in that, not a pity, but in a, I'm sad that you are having to experience those stages and that fear, and all of those things that come along with it. But let me tell you what, you can have those feelings, but you've got to say, okay, I need to pick myself up by my bootstraps and I need to become an advocate because there is no greater service you can do for your child than to be their voice
Mhm.
and to know that you can't be a softie. You can't be one that backs down. You have to be able to be an advocate. And if you personally cannot be the person that speaks on their behalf or helps them speak on their own behalf, you need to surround yourself with people that can do that for you. Because unfortunately, the way the systems are designed, they are designed for denials. And trust me, from that point on, there have been moments of terror, grief, all of those stages. You're sad, you're scared, and then you get mad and you get angry and those things make me more determined. So when I am up front in those rallies and speaking, and when I'm doing education and doing trainings, I never want anyone to think that I have not walked in the same shoes and along that path, because I have. If there is one thing that I could tell parents, it's get ready for the ride. And if you have the knowledge or surround your people with knowledge that can help you build that confidence to speak on behalf of the rights of your child or other loved one, then the path is going to be so much easier. But you have to do it at the very beginning.
Christy, what would you say to a parent who just received a diagnosis?
I am the biggest expert there is on my children. I know my children better than anyone on this earth. And I don't care what initials you have after your name. I know my children. So I tell parents, listen to your gut. You are the expert, and don't take no for an answer.
Yeah. Trust your gut. And if you feel you're not being taken seriously or provided what you need, then get a second opinion. Trust your gut. And not doctors. I love doctors. We love doctors. We have great relationships with a lot of doctors, but there's a lot of egos out there, with doctors who, even if you question and you have very valid questions or concerns, because you ask the question, they're going to make you wait on an answer or make you feel, that you don't have a basis to ask that question. And that to me is just like, okay, I'm moving on. I hate confrontation. I don't like, when I feel it's going to be a confrontational conversation. But let me tell you, I have had to, in situations when I knew I was right, step out of that comfort zone and be able to express those concerns and feelings to doctors, to teachers, to principals, to you know uh, state led whoever. I mean, just because, as Christy said, somebody has an initial or has a position of higher authority than me, there were times pre Anna that I would have went, oh, I think I'll wait it out. Let's just see how things work out. That never gets you anywhere in our world.
What about parents who have a child that just entered into special education? What types of advice would you guys be able to offer to them?
If you know those policies and those laws, then all you have to do is take it with you and lay it down in front of them with the highlighted portion, and you have all the facts and statistics on your side. You don't have to do a lot of talking. You're just like, well, this is not what it says in, this letter to colleague from the, United States Department of Education. Explain how you're abiding by this in this situation, because right here it says in black and white, this is the law.
Yeah,
So
that's my favorite thing to do is
Yeah.
We'll throw out the policy and say, here's the policy.
Yep.
Show me where it says that.
I am one, and I know Christy is as well, because we have partnered through the West Virginia Developmental Disabilities Council, through Partners in Policy Making, which is huge and something that I hope all families of children with developmental disabilities would take advantage of. You know, we've been to the rights law trainings. We have gone to every training imaginable that is offered because that's how we have built our knowledge. I mean, I've gone to local trainings, I've gone to state trainings, I've gone to national trainings and conferences, and anywhere I could get my hands on information. That's how we have built our knowledge and our expertise. But there's a lot of misinformation that is
Right.
passed through those groups. And there is one particular Facebook group right now that I am part of, and I just watch, and I am shocked at the amount of inaccurate misinformation, wrong, flat out wrong guidance that parents are given when they're asked a question,
Well, yeah.
and not just by other parents, but by case managers of agencies. And it goes back to, you know, lack of training and staff turnover and cuts to services. And
Right.
so I guess
But
my point is, you've got to go in with an open mind, but also do your own research.
I agree.
I think you hit the nail on the head, Christina, when you said do your own research. There again, read that policy. Don't expect somebody to do it for you. You have to vet the people that are speaking. You know, you want to vet those people. And it goes back to also what I said, listen to your gut. And, you know, just because I don't want to say just because Christina and I have like similar expectations for our children, that other people can't have other expectations
Exactly.
for their children. But it still goes back to knowing the policy, knowing the rules, doing your research, vetting the people that you're listening to. And I think that, you know, just like in talking to other parents, you know, you can learn from those other parents, but you listen and you find out what they're saying and where they heard it from. You're still vetting that information.
Mhm.
Yeah, definitely. And I think one of the other points that I would hit on is advocating for, from the parent point of view, educating yourself on what therapies your child actually needs. Because one thing that I have learned within our group is we are subjected to a lot of providers that just want to put their hand in and say, I help autism, I help disabilities.
Mhm.
And they may not be certified. They may not have the credentials that I would hold as a standard for my child going to. And they may just have some type of cheap certification that you can get online that says I'm an autism coach. Come and seek out my services and you know, seek out private pay. I don't take insurance. And when you're a parent and a newly diagnosed parent, you're doing everything in your power to get your child up to speed, to get them to hit these milestones that birth to 3 is going off of. So for me personally, I was seeking everything from vitamins to devices, toys, anything that said it could help autism, sensory processing, I bought. And I fell victim quickly. And even having him in a therapy center that was an absolute nightmare. It didn't matter. I was giving them as much money as they would take to keep him there. We really need to educate our parents on is just because you have that diagnosis, do your education on who you're going to. Are
Mhm.
they credentialed? Do you
Mhm.
want, you know, is this therapy right for you? And if your
Mhm.
child's not progressing, don't be afraid to pull them out of it. Don't keep spending $100 a week on a
Well,
therapy just because a provider said OT, speech, physical, ABA, take it and just sink your money in it. I
well,
was
Right.
that
And
parent.
And you're
Yeah.
going to
Learn from
find
me.
in the education system, that's the other piece. There have been a lot of times. I mean, there's some cookie cutter approaches to, oh, your child has autism. They need this many minutes, and this is what we're going to focus on. And I'm telling you, when it comes to special ed advocacy, and when we get clear back to that services page, and I'm talking from, preschool, 3 years old up through graduating up to 21 potentially. Nothing angers me more than to see the same. You take all the IEPs that have of children with autism in a certain school, and that back page could literally be copied. It just has a different name at the top. And that
Yeah.
is maddening to me.
Well,
I'm all about that individualized, and you have to don't let them force you into some of those things just because it's always been done for every child with autism or Down syndrome or yeah.
right. And that's, I think it goes back to also that diagnosis. We're talking about conditions, not illnesses.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that gets misconstrued. And trust me, I have heard everything too. A lot of providers, not all, not all. I mean, there are people that truly love what they do and do a great job at what they do in different therapies and different things. But there are also a lot of providers, at least at the top, maybe not the therapist, that are there for the wrong reasons, just like the people trying to sell us the vitamins.
Mm-hmm.
They're making money off our children's vulnerabilities, whether it's Down syndrome, autism, cerebral palsy. West Virginia has the highest population of people with disabilities per capita.
Within the IPPs, if your child receives waiver services, and we know not every child out there receives waiver services, and not every adult receives waiver services, because West Virginia has the most strict eligibility requirements than any state in the country. It's very difficult to be eligible for waiver. But if they do receive waiver services, then there is a document that, like the IFSP is birth to three, IEP is within the school system, and the IPP is that's the program plan, individual program or personal plan, that is written on how the waiver funds, what services and supports they get through waiver. And, one of the key foundational pieces of Title 19 waiver is home and community-based services, and they must be following the federal guidelines for, what that looks like, and ensuring that their agency is following those guidelines for a state to be able to receive those funds. And that's kind of in a nutshell, in general. And I love going into some of these IPP meetings as an advocate with families. And, one of the boxes you have to check mark basically is, was person-centered planning considered? Were the thoughts and needs and wishes and desires of that adult with disabilities considered in writing this plan? Of course. Yes, of course it was. Really? Because I've just seen 10 plans that are exactly the same, but they've been cut and pasted. I actually received one for Anna one time. They forgot to cut and paste her name out. They put somebody else's name in her plan. That was actually in an IEP. And so, as a family, as a parent, as the person or guardian or the person who is sitting in that meeting, you need to be able to be strong enough to speak up and say, here's the checklist. Explain to me how what you're proposing and what my loved one is asking, how they mesh. I don't care about your profit. I'm asking you to tell me, based on these two things, explain how this is happening. And they either can or they can't. And you have to be willing to take it to the next level and file an appeal or file a complaint or make a call above their heads to have someone else look into the situation.
At what point did your advocacy really take off for your children?
It wasn't too far after my daughter was in elementary that I was actually helping parents, find ways to get trained and going to trainings and having them come in to talk to groups of parents. And then, yeah, we were running things by each other, and somewhere in elementary school, yes, I ended up going to some IEP meetings with other parents. Did I didn't have enough knowledge, but I can promise you I had more knowledge than the people across the table, unfortunately. But so at kindergarten, we're worried about third grade. We're looking ahead at third grade. And then at after we get past that hurdle, we're looking at middle school and transition and what we should be doing towards that. I guess that would be another piece of advice I would give parents is always be looking ahead, because if you wait until that year, that date, you're too late. You are going to miss the boat, and then you're going to be behind.
There's a lot of advocacy that has to happen in a lifetime of a person with a disability. But if there is one thing I could stress right now to every parent of a youngster, start with special education advocacy. The other things pale in comparison. Calling a doctor pales in comparison to having to sit across a table with 15 people in an IEP meeting. And if you have mastered or start getting that knowledge of advocacy and learning a law and understanding what the rights are for you as a parent and the child in the school system, if you can do that, the rest of it, as you go through, will all come along.
I would say that education and Medicaid are the two most important things. But once you get that Medicaid, it's important to know that policy. But I would still be like Christina and focus more on education, because we all know that when we got Medicaid, it was like winning the lottery.
One of the things that is so frustrating to me as a special ed advocate, or just as a parent, and I watch other parents, forget professional advocacy, just as a parent, you have had to ask and beg and plead, and you've called me or you've called other family members and they've told you what you need to do, or they've attended meetings and you step out in the hallway and you're like, you need to say this because this is what they're doing, and they're like, oh no, I'm too afraid, I'm too afraid. You know what? There comes a point that you have to let that fear go, and you have, because that's what they're depending on, hammering your self-confidence down to make you not think you know what you need for your child, because it's easier on them if they get what they want. I'm talking about systems, the school system. And I have family members who are teachers and principals. I mean, my other daughter is a teacher. I mean, we love teachers. But when it comes to special ed advocacy and special education advocacy and just educational advocacy in general, you cannot be afraid to demand that they follow the law. And our school systems are failing our kids with disabilities at an exponential rate.
I think it just shows how much passion you guys have behind what you do and the years of service that you have given to so many. Because I know for myself, being very new to this, my son's only 6.5. I'm considered a newbie at this point. I haven't gone through the rights law books. I have them. I've gone through 2 basic IEP courses. I don't have enough of that knowledge to go with a family and sit and be able to speak up like you guys can. But it does motivate me, and I know it's going to motivate so many other parents to go, you know what? It's time. I'm done being quiet. I'm done being shy, lack of confidence. I want to ask you both, where did this confidence come from? I know in our back of my mind as a parent, I think that advocacy kind of gets pushed forward through the years and with experience, and sometimes with bad experience, it really gets pushed through. But where did you get the confidence to really have that voice and speak up and say, this is wrong and here's why?
Well, I'll tell you, well, I think for me, I think it is my children are my life. It is personal. And yeah, I think like Christina had just mentioned, training. Yeah, I think that just feeling empowered in training
Mhm.
and helps, feeling empowered to speak up. And you get that with training, but it's also I think because these are my children, and if I'm not going to speak up for them, who's going to?
Mhm.
Who's going to? No one else is going to. And then when I hear another parent's story, when a parent gets my number or they call me or they message me on Facebook or whatever, you know, I hear it in their voice, their desperation. This person that doesn't know me, it took courage to reach out, even to us as other parents. I hear that desperation and I remember. I
Mhm.
won't ever forget, being there from for the get-go. And so once I hear that, a lot of times then it becomes personal. Their story, it's me reliving it again. So it's all personal. And
Mhm.
so I think that's what gave me the courage to speak out. I am that mama bear. Yeah, I mean, that's the answer for me anyway, as
Mhm.
far as that's why I speak up, because it's my kids, and no one knows my children better than I do, and no one is going to advocate better
Mhm.
than I am going to advocate for my children.
One point, though, that I want to make is that I don't want anyone out there listening to this to think that it works out for us every time, too. I will
No.
tell you, I mean, Christy and I, believe me, I've gone to her IDD. We've collaborated. Let me tell you, I can spout the law. I can go in and just from experience, I'll tell you the other thing, not just going to a training. And I've been to 4 rights law trainings over the years. Every time I go, I learn something new. I've been to, I mean, trainings. I can't even tell you the number of special education advocacy trainings I've been to over the years. But you know what? Anna's 8th grade year, I thought we were never going to make it through. I called and had people from the board office attend the meeting with me because the school and the administrators and the teachers they didn't care that it was Christina the advocate coming through that door. I I knew what my rights were and I knew that they were violating the law. And in one meeting, there were 8 pieces of policy, West Virginia policy 2419 and IDEA that was violated so blatantly. And they didn't care because there was no accountability. They weren't being held accountable from the higher ups. And I literally stood up. When I get so angry, I get emotional. When I cry, that means I am so mad that I could spit bullets. And I literally stood up and it was an entire room full of people at her middle school. And I stood up and I called the meeting. I said, "This meeting is done. I am done. I am done playing. I'm done." Um, and I had to excuse myself from the meeting and call the meeting. And then we had to regroup later because they were not. There's also a time when you have to call meetings and just stop them and come back at a later time because it's not being productive. But they were in such violation of so many things, but you would think they would have their ducks in a row when they knew you were going to be walking through the door. And the fact that they didn't and they didn't care just proves how broken the system is. And we know for a fact that when you bring an advocate to a meeting or somebody to a meeting that can call them on the law, things go totally differently. We know it, we've seen it. It shouldn't be that way. It absolutely shouldn't be that way. The other thing that I think is critically important is to look at other people's IEPs. And I love nothing more than when groups of
And
parents get
and
together
IPPs.
and IPPs, absolutely.
Yeah,
If you
because
have a plan, get a group of people in a room and everybody pull out their plans and go page, but one page at a time and kind of see what's written in other people's. I can tell you present levels and things like that in some counties are so sorely insufficient,
Right.
and
And then,
other
and then,
counties do a great job at it.
right, and they, none of them should be the same, but
No, they
there
should
might
not
be,
be.
but there will be similarities to where you can tell if something is right or it's wrong.
Yeah. And there's a lot of great websites out there now that you can go prepared with, or at least with some idea of what you want your goals to be. I mean, Teachtastic is a fantastic resource where it will that resource for doing math and English goals and how to break them down depending on the age and where the the present levels are. I mean, that's a fantastic one. And you can even Google it while you're there and come up a day in our shoes. We've got a lot of resources out there where you can go prepared with, oh, my child is doing this, then maybe this needs to be their accommodation. And you can even type things up and hand it to the team and say, I want these things to be considered during this meeting. But I love getting groups of parents together and having them compare their documents. Um, and that's a great learning experience.
I think that it's important for people to tell your story. Some
Mhm.
things, some tips also that I would give, tell your story, go to the legislature. Everything's on the legislative website. You can look up who your senator is or your House of Delegate member is, but it's important to tell your story. They are a part-time legislature. So they're not there every, every day. They're only there for 2 months is the session, plus there's interim committees, but they're not every month after the session. So it's important that you build those relationships with them, and they're not experts on everything. So that's how they, you tell them your story, and then something comes up, a bill comes up, and it's like, oh, that's my constituent. I could talk to them because they're not experts on everything.
Mhm.
Um, the next piece again is, every policy, review these websites. Bureau for Medical Services, that has all of the different waivers. That's who's that's the Medicaid for our state. So all those programs, all those home and community-based services programs are under the Bureau for Medical Services. They have times when there's a plan and they're every 5 years, but they can make amendments to those plans. Review those websites routinely. The same with the Department of Education. These policies come up also for public comment. They don't like to publicize it too much because then you might comment and read the policy. So there again, for the Department of Ed, Bureau for Medical Services, both these places, those policies come up on their website for public comment. That's where you can read the policies anyway. Yes, it looks like gobbledygook the first time or two you read it and you're like, I don't know what this is even talking about. Trust me, it makes sense. After a while, it starts to make sense. So it's important that we do share, comment and say, hey, this is a bad choice. This is how this would affect me. Whether that's, home and community-based services or whether that's education. That again is a good way that you can feel empowered and how you can make a change and how you can advocate.
Christy, let me piggyback on one thing that you just said there about empowerment. A couple of things that I think are critically important that is lacking also from the education system and in the programming system and the plans. Is making sure that individuals with disabilities, the individuals themselves, are given the opportunity to speak on behalf of themselves and their wants and needs, desires, wishes. Maybe it's not verbally, maybe it's they're able to put a letter together, maybe it's using their augmentative communication device, maybe it is using a sign language interpreter or whatever it is. But so many times those out in society believe that because someone someone can't communicate verbally, or they may not be able to be understood verbally, or have limited communication skills that they don't have anything to say. And from a education system, having those children be part of their IEPs from kindergarten on, from preschool on, even for a tiny little bit, if they just pop in and say, hi, my name is, Little Miss Mary, and I love watching whatever. See y'all later, clear up until they are in high school, where they sit through the meeting and can be asked questions, or maybe even in some situations, not all, but Anna led her final senior IEP with notes and with accommodations. And so really encouraging those self-advocacy skills throughout the entire lifetime. So that's one thing, whether it's at the legislature or, advocating for what they want and need in their home, and out in the community.
Telling their story as well.
Absolutely. And making that part of their story. And then the one last advocacy tip that I have to say that kind of goes along all of the stuff we've talked about. If I have one bit of advice to any parent, if it's not in writing, it didn't happen. I always lead with that with everything. If it's not in writing, it didn't happen. From a very early age, you might as well just go buy you some tubs, plastic tubs, and find a place in your storage building or your attic, because I cannot tell you how important it is. You may have to go back and find a piece of paper from 10 years ago. So make sure that you keep copies of everything and don't throw stuff away. IEPs, IPPs, diagnoses, those types of things. Just for an example, we were just audited by the IRS and had to prove that Anna has a disability. And I had to go back and find her genotype, which is the thing that showed her 3 additional chromosomes, or her trisomy 21. So make sure that you keep those very important documents forever and ever. And if it's not in writing, it didn't happen. And if you were talking to anyone on the phone for anything important, keep their name, the time, and date that you spoke to them.
And follow it back up with an email that recaps the whole conversation.
Yes.
You taught me well.
Yeah. Thank you guys so much for everything that you have done for parents like me and for our community, and the work that you're continuing to do. It is so impactful. I can't imagine the number of families that you have impacted over the past several years. So thank you guys so much on behalf of the entire disability community. It's just absolutely amazing. And you have given me something to really strive and reach for in my own advocacy journey. And as raising a child with autism, I look up to you guys so much. So thank you for all that you guys are doing. Thank you for being here. And I am so excited to put this together and to talk to you guys again.
Good. Thank you so much for having us. And you're doing a great job, and we really appreciate you too. So great job. I know parents are very fortunate to have you providing this education to them. So, and being in their corner.
Ditto.
If you would like to learn more about our nonprofit or to make a donation, you can visit our website at www.unpuzzledparentsconnect.com, or you can follow us on Facebook. And if you enjoy our podcast, please hit the like and subscribe button. Thanks.